The Marlowe Murder Club by Robert Thorogood. Note to readers. This book contains the following accessibility features which, if supported by your device, can be accessed via your e-reader accessibility settings. Change of font size and line height. Change of background and font colors. Change of font, change justification, text-to-speech, page numbers, taking... blah blah blah. For KDB. Chapter 1. Mrs. Judith Potts was 77 years old and entirely happy with her life. She lived in an arts and crafts mansion on the River Thames. She had a job she loved that took up just enough of her time, and no more, the best of all. She didn't have to share her life with any man. This meant that there was no one asking her what was for dinner that night, or wanting to know where she was going every time she left the house, or moaning that she was spending too much money on whiskey, a small glass, which she would have at about 6 each evening. On the day Judith's life changed, it was the height of summer, and England had been in the grip of a heat wave for weeks. She kept all of the windows open to catch whatever breezes blew down the valley, but it seemed to make no difference. The heat of the sun had got into the bricks and timbers of her home, into the oak staircase and minstrel's gallery. After taking her evening meal in front of the television news, she put her empty plate to one side and got out the latest copy of Puzzler magazine. She turned to a logic grid and started to work on it. Usually, she enjoyed reducing the language of the clues down to the mathematical ones and zeros, but tonight her heart just wasn't in it. It was too hard to concentrate. Judith's hand idly went to the key she kept on a chain around her neck, and her thoughts began to drift into the past, into a much darker time. She shot up from her chair. This wouldn't do, she told herself. Wouldn't do at all. There was always something else she could do to keep herself busy. She needed a change of scene, and that was all, and she had the perfect solution. Judith began to take off her clothes. With each garment she removed, she felt more and more released from the stifling constraints of the day. By the time she was naked, she was buzzing with an impish delight. She crossed the hallway, past the Bluthner grand piano she only ever played when she was really very drunk, and took up a dark gray woolen cape she kept by the front door. Judith's cape was her most treasured possession. Sorry for the stuttering. She'd tell anyone who asked, and many did, that it kept her warm in winter, served as a picnic blanket in the summer, and she could pull it over her head if she was ever caught in a spring shower. Best of all, Judith believed it was a cloak of invisibility. Every evening, come rain or shine, she'd take off her clothes, wrap the cape around herself, and step out of her house feeling a delicious frisson of naughtiness. She would plunge her feet into a pair of ancient willies and stride through the knee-high grass, swish, 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 to her boathouse. Like the rest of Judith's house, it was pink brick, timber-framed, and somewhat crumbling. Judy entered the cobwebby darkness and kicked off her wellies. She hung her cape on an old hook, and still hidden from the outside world by a pair of ancient boathouse doors, stepped down the stone slipway and into the Thames. It was almost a religious experience for her, accepting the cold water onto her skin, and she exhaled with a whoosh as she leant forward into the embrace of the river. Suppose suddenly she was weightless, supported by the soft body that felt like silk to her body. She swam upstream, the evening sunshine flashing diamonds on the water all around. Judith smiled to herself. She always smiled to herself when she was out swimming. She couldn't help it. After all, there might be dog walkers on the Thames path, and there were very definitely plenty of people in the near distance as she looked at the spire of the Marlowe Church and the span of the Victorian suspension bridge that linked to the town of the neighboring village of Bisham. None of these people were aware that there was a 77-year-old woman swimming nearby entirely in the nude. It was just as Judith was thinking, "This is a life," that she heard a shout. It came from the opposite riverbank, from somewhere near her neighbor Stefan Dinwoody's house. But from her position low in the water, it was hard for Judith to see exactly what was going on. Only the roof of Stefan's house was visible above the thick bank of bulrushes at the edge of the river. Judith strained her ears, but all was quiet. She decided it must have been an animal, a dog or a fox maybe. But then she heard a man's voice call out, "Hey, no! What on earth was that? Stefan, is that you?" Judith called from the river, but her words were cut short by the sharp retort of a gunshot. "Stefan!" she shouted again, panic rising. "Are you all right?" All was silence, but Judith knew what she'd heard. Someone fired a gun, hadn't they? And Stefan's voice had called out immediately beforehand. What if he was now bleeding from a bullet wound and needed saving? Judith swam towards Stefan's house as best she could, but as she reached his riverbank, she realized she had a problem. Beyond the bulrushes, Stefan had put corrugated metal at the span of his lawn to protect it from river erosion. Judith knew that swinging through the rushes would cut her body to shreds, and even if she made it to land, she wouldn't be able to pull herself out. She wouldn't have the strength. Ahead of her, she could see a blue canoe wedged in among the weeds. Could she somehow use it to lever her body out of the water? She tried to grab a hold of the end, but she couldn't get a proper grip. It kept bobbing around like a cork, and she realized she didn't have the balance to climb up onto the canoe anyway. But she gave one last go, and this time just about managed to pull herself up onto the back of it. And then, oh so slowly, she and the canoe barrel rolled over. She lost her hold and fell back into the water with an ungainly splash. She came up for air and shook the water from her hair. The canoe was out of the question, so what else she could do? Judith swam back to the center of the river, desperately looking for someone who could help. Where were the dog walkers or the canoodling couples when you needed them? She couldn't see. Anyway, there was only one thing for it. She turned and swam for home as fast as she could. Reaching her boathouse, Judith climbed out of the water wheezing, but there was no time to lose. She threw her cape and strode out onto the lawn, turning back to look at what she could see of Stefan's house. Only half of his garden was visible behind the weeping willow that grew unchecked on her side of the riverbank. She ran into her house, grabbed up her phone, and dialed 999. As she waited for the call to collect, she moved over to the bay window to keep an eye on Stefan's property. "I need the police," Judith said as soon as the call was answered. "There's been a shooting at my neighbor's house. Hurry, someone was shot." The operator took down the details of Stefan's address, recorded what Judith had seen, and informed her that emergency services would be on their way, and then ended the call. Judith felt deeply frustrated. Surely there was something else she could do, or someone else she could phone. What about the Coast Guard? Was it a waterside catastrophe after all, or the RNLI? Judith peered out of her window at Stefan's property. It was still sitting there, apparently innocently in the evening sunshine. If anyone had been out on the river at that precise moment and had occasion to look up at Judith's mansion, they'd have seen a very short and comfortably plump woman in the late 70s with wild gray hair standing entirely naked in her bay window, cape over her shoulders as if she were some kind of superhero, which in many ways she was. She just didn't know it yet.